You know that feeling? Have you ever just wanted to completely reinvent your life overnight? Well, welcome to this explainer, where today we're digging into a truly fascinating psychological phenomenon. We're going to look at the science behind that sudden, overwhelming desire to wake up tomorrow with an entirely new life. I mean, we've all been there, right? And today we are going to unpack exactly why your brain does this, using some incredibly insightful concepts. And I'm not talking about, deciding to eat a few more vegetables or finally organizing your desk. Actually, scratch that. I am talking about that sudden 2 a.m. urge to switch careers, move to a cabin in the woods, start a bakery, and become a highly optimized morning person by sunrise. One moment, you're kind of frustrated with how things are going, and the next, you want to be a totally unrecognizable, deeply zen version of yourself. Okay, let's dive into this because psychology reveals that this massive urge doesn't actually come from simple motivation. Not at all. It comes from emotional overload. What we're really dealing with here is identity frustration. It is your mind's desperate need for an escape hatch. It's not that you're just suddenly super inspired, it's that your brain is overwhelmed and is literally pulling the psychological fire alarm. So to really understand this, let's map out our journey for today. We'll hit the sudden rebirth urge, look at escaping the old you, the fresh start fantasy, intensity versus real transformation, and wrap up with the path to real change. Starting right off with part one, the sudden rebirth urge and the heavy weight of the current self. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this concept of emotional rebirth. See, sometimes you don't just dislike your current situation, you become completely emotionally exhausted with the version of yourself that's tied to that situation. Your daily routines, your past mistakes, those repeated emotional patterns, they start to feel incredibly heavy. It's literally like walking around wearing a backpack full of rocks. So psychologically, your brain craves a brand new self simply as a form of relief. It desires an emotional rebirth just so it can finally put that heavy backpack down. Which brings us to part two, escaping the old you. This is really the true driver behind the whole reinvention urge. Because often, the desire to be someone completely new is really just a disguised desire to run away. We're talking about pain, stress, loneliness, a sense of failure, or just flat-out regret. These are the uncomfortable emotions your mind is desperately trying to escape. You aren't necessarily running toward a new life, right? You're actually running away from emotional discomfort. And here is the core conflict: escaping discomfort versus actual gradual healing. Instead of taking the time to slowly process difficult emotions, like, say, a recent failure or some lingering loneliness, the mind takes a shortcut. It fantasizes about becoming someone entirely different. Because psychologically speaking, dreaming about a sudden escape feels like taking a helicopter, which is way less painful than actually hiking the steep, gradual mountain of healing. Let's move to part three and see how this builds. We call this the fresh start fantasy, or the illusion of the clean slate. Our brains absolutely love the idea of starting over because new beginnings feel so psychologically pristine. A fresh start means no past mistakes, no old identity, and zero emotional baggage. We heavily romanticize this, don't we? We imagine that if we just change our environment, maybe move to a totally new city, buy a new wardrobe, or completely overhaul our daily schedule, it's going to instantly and magically change how we feel on the inside. But here is a hard psychological truth, and I'm going to drop this like a mic. Unresolved patterns usually follow the person wherever they go. Wow. You can change your zip code, you can completely change your morning routine, but if you haven't dealt with the underlying emotional patterns, your old baggage is getting right on that plane next to you. It absolutely doesn't vanish just because you bought a fancy new planner. Which perfectly sets up part four, intensity versus real transformation. This is the ultimate battle between emotion and behavior. Let's look at the actual anatomy of this urge. Step one, you experience an event, a failure, a heartbreak, maybe some intense frustration. Step two, boom, that generates incredibly powerful emotional intensity. And step three, because of that massive spike, you suddenly feel ready to change absolutely everything about your life. It perfectly mimics real motivation, but it's an illusion. So the crucial point is right here: temporary urgency versus permanent transformation. Psychology shows us that intense emotional moments create urgency, but they don't create permanence. In that split second of frustration or heartbreak, your mind feels entirely different immediately. You feel transformed. But your actual behavior? Yeah, behavior changes much, much slower. We are constantly confusing the intense feeling of wanting to change with the actual literal process of changing. And that leads us to our final section, part 5, the path to real change and why we really need to embrace the gradual process. And this brilliantly illustrates the trap. Look at day 1. You've got all that emotional excitement, that massive urge to change right now. But flash forward to month 1, and what is it? It's repetitive, ordinary, slow. See, the brain wants the long-lasting behavioral change of year 1 on day 1, but it has to survive the total boredom of month 1 to actually get there. Because the truth is, real behavioral change isn't some dramatic, fast-paced movie montage. It's repetitive, it's slow, and honestly, it is totally ordinary. Most importantly, though, it is often emotionally uncomfortable. People imagine this grand, dramatic transformation, and then they get wildly frustrated when their actual progress just feels incredibly slow and mundane. But listen, if it feels repetitive and a bit uncomfortable, that is actually the sign that real change is happening. So here is your big takeaway from this explainer. Don't just chase the emotional excitement of change. We all love that day 1 motivation for sure, but people who only chase that high usually quit way before the real work even begins. Stay long enough for actual change to happen. Once you understand the hidden psychology of your own mind, once you realize that your brain is just trying to escape discomfort, you can finally stop chasing the myth of the overnight new life. So I'm going to leave you with this question to chew on. Are you chasing a fantasy, or are you ready for the slow, messy work of real change? Think about your own patterns, your goals, and how you approach personal transformation. Understanding why we act the way we do helps us see ourselves differently. And honestly, that is exactly where the real work begins. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope it helps you on your own path to lasting change.